The boardroom gleamed with sharp edges and polished glass, as if every surface had been designed to remind anyone who entered of power. Outside the tall windows, the city sprawled in endless lines of traffic and steel towers, but inside, the air was colder, heavy with the arrogance of men who believed they owned not just the room but the world. The executives lounged in their leather chairs, cufflinks glinting, their laughter bouncing off the walls like sharp knives. They were preparing for the arrival of their foreign counterparts, a delegation whose language most of them couldn't even pronounce properly, let alone speak. Why waste money on a professional translator? One of them scoffed, twirling a pen between his fingers. We've got someone right under our noses. It will be more entertaining. That was how the idea was born, cheap, cruel, and perfectly in line with their sense of humor. They called for the cleaner. She had been moving quietly in the hall, mop in hand, invisible as always. The executives barely looked at her when she emptied bins or polished floors. Now, though, their eyes followed her with a mixture of condescension and amusement. Come in here, the eldest of them ordered, his voice dripping with mock politeness. We need your assistance. The woman hesitated at the doorway, her hands still damp from rinsing cloths. She wore her plain uniform, a shade of blue that had faded from too many washes, and her shoes were scuffed from long days on her feet. She glanced around the vast room, then back at them, wary. Yes, sir. Her voice was quiet but steady. You speak their language, don't you? Another asked, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. You've got that accent. Perfect. You'll translate for us. Her brows drew together slightly, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Translate. For an international business meeting. She opened her mouth to protest, but the way they were looking at her made her chest tighten. They weren't really asking. They were playing with her. I can speak it, she admitted, her voice trailing off. Excellent, the eldest said, clapping his hands once. Then it's settled. You'll be our interpreter today. Consider it an upgrade from scrubbing floors. Laughter rippled across the room, low and mocking. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks but kept her gaze lowered. Something in her stomach twisted, a mix of fear and quiet defiance. She had not been asked. She had been summoned, toyed with, and put on display. And yet, she nodded, because to refuse would be worse. As she stepped further into the room, she became hyper-aware of her surroundings, the shine of their watches, the smell of expensive cologne, the polished shoes that clicked against the floor as one man crossed his legs. She felt out of place, a shadow dragged into the light, but she also felt something else, the weight of a secret they didn't know. They thought she was their joke, but the language they feared was one she had carried since childhood, spoken at her grandmother's knee and sharpened through years of reading and practice. She took a seat at the far end of the table, her back straight though her palms were damp. A few executives exchanged sly glances, one even chuckling under his breath as he whispered something to the man beside him. She caught the word, janitor, slip out before it dissolved into another snicker. They were ready for her to stumble, to mangle words, to embarrass herself so they could feel taller in their tailored suits. The door opened suddenly, and the foreign delegation entered, 3 men in dark suits and 1 woman in a pearl gray jacket. Their expressions were polite but guarded, eyes sharp, as though already wary of being underestimated. The executives rose to shake hands, their English polished but heavy with entitlement. All the while, they glanced back at the cleaner, smirking as if waiting for the punchline of a joke. She rose as well, bowing her head respectfully, her lips forming the familiar sounds of greeting in their language. For a fleeting moment, the delegation looked surprised, not at her presence, but at the fluency and warmth in her tone. The executives didn't notice. They were too busy hiding their laughter behind handshakes and false smiles. She sat again, folding her hands in her lap, and waited for the meeting to begin. The room buzzed with confidence that belonged to the powerful, but beneath it all, a different kind of silence lingered, the silence before a storm, before laughter turns into something else entirely. And though her heart raced, she felt it building inside her, the calm certainty that their laughter would not last. The meeting began with a shuffle of papers, the click of pens, and the smug coughs of men who believed they owned the room. One of the executives leaned forward, his voice loud and deliberate. "We are here to discuss opportunities for a merger," he said in English, each word heavy with arrogance. Then, without even looking at the cleaner, he flicked his fingers at her as if she were a servant. Translate. She inhaled slowly, lifted her chin, and spoke. The words rolled off her tongue with the ease of water slipping over stone, every syllable pronounced with clarity. The foreign delegates turned toward her, eyebrows lifting, then nodded with genuine respect. She hadn't just translated his sentence, she had softened its sharp edges, shaping it into something dignified. The executives smirked. To them, it was still part of the game. They exchanged glances, and another leaned in, lowering his voice as if to share a joke only they would understand. "Tell them we're not here to waste time," he muttered, a cruel curl at the edge of his lips. "Make sure they know who holds the cards." She looked at him, her expression unreadable, then turned back to the delegates. In their language, her voice was steady, thoughtful, carrying respect. Instead of repeating his arrogance, she said, "They value your time deeply and look forward to a partnership built on equality and trust." The effect was immediate. The delegates nodded approvingly, their posture relaxing, their guarded expression softening. One of them even smiled, jotting notes in his leather-bound book. The executives didn't notice the shift. They were too busy congratulating themselves, their smirks broadening as they mistook the delegates' warmth for admiration of their own authority. Another executive cleared his throat. He leaned close to the cleaner so that only she could hear. "Add a bit of flair. Make us sound brilliant," he whispered, as though she were his puppet. She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to catch his smugness. "As you wish," she murmured, then addressed the delegates again. This time, her words painted the executives not as tyrants but as visionaries who sought cooperation, as leaders who believed in mutual progress. Her phrasing elevated the conversation, transforming hollow boasts into promises of respect. The delegates exchanged glances of admiration, leaning forward with interest. The executives preened, convinced the praise was theirs alone. But not everyone in the room was blind. The woman in the pearl gray jacket studied the cleaner carefully, her eyes narrowing slightly with every phrase. She noticed the rhythm of the translation, the careful choices, the subtle refinements. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, as though she understood more than the executives realized. One of the younger executives decided to push further. He leaned back in his chair and said with a mocking drawl, "Ask them if they're prepared to pay handsomely for the privilege of working with us." Laughter rippled among his colleagues, low and ugly. The cleaner hesitated for half a second, her stomach twisting. She knew their words, translated directly, would destroy the fragile bridge she was building. She thought quickly, her voice calm when she spoke. "They ask instead how best to align resources so both sides prosper fairly," she said. The delegates lit up, murmuring to one another, impressed by the cooperative tone. The executives grinned, mistaking the positive reaction for proof of their superiority. Their arrogance swelled, but the laughter that had once filled the room began to fade, replaced by an undercurrent of unease. With each passing moment, the cleaner's confidence grew. Her voice, once hesitant, now carried authority. She began to weave not just words but intention, guarding the dignity of the conversation while quietly stripping the executives of their power. The room no longer revolved around their arrogance, it revolved around her steady, flawless command of language. Still, they tried to mock her. A senior executive leaned toward another, whispering loudly enough for her to hear. "Listen to her. Sounds like she's telling bedtime stories. Who knew our mop girl had a tongue?" The others chuckled, but their laughter rang hollow now, like coins dropped into an empty jar. The foreign partners, meanwhile, were no longer looking at the executives. Their eyes sought hers, waiting for her words, nodding when she spoke. Respect radiated from them, subtle but unmistakable. The cleaner felt it, the tide beginning to turn. Their laughter was thinning, their arrogance cracking, even if they didn't yet realize it. She kept her face composed, her voice steady, but inside, something fierce and unshakable was rising. They had brought her here to laugh at her. Instead, with every word she spoke, she was silencing them one breath at a time. The tension in the room shifted almost imperceptibly, like the subtle change in air before a storm. The executives still wore their smirks, still leaned back in their chairs with an air of careless dominance, but the balance was tilting. The cleaner could feel it. Every time she opened her mouth, the foreign delegates leaned forward, their attention fixed not on the men in suits but on her. The eldest executive, sensing something he couldn't quite name, cleared his throat. "Tell them we expect immediate commitment," he said, his tone sharp, as though snapping a whip. He tilted his head toward her, eyes narrowed with a warning. No sugarcoating. She met his gaze for a brief moment, then turned back to the delegates. Her heart thudded, but her voice emerged steady and calm, each syllable chosen with care. "They are eager to move quickly, but they also value patience to ensure the foundation of this partnership is unshakable." The delegates nodded, pleased by her phrasing. One of them, the woman in the pearl gray jacket, smiled faintly and responded in kind, her words deliberate, her gaze locked on the cleaner. She says they respect balance, the cleaner translated, and that rushing without trust would dishonor both sides. The executives didn't even hear the subtle warning in those words. They only saw the approving nods, and their arrogance swelled again. "See," one of them whispered to another. "They're falling into line." But they weren't. The cleaner was guiding the conversation away from cliffs the executives were too blind to see. Another executive leaned in, irritation sharpening his tone. "Tell them they'd be foolish to walk away from our offer. No one else can give them what we can." He smirked, confident that such a threat would establish dominance. The cleaner inhaled, her mind racing. A literal translation would end the discussion in seconds. Instead, she straightened in her chair, her voice taking on a weight that surprised even her. "They say your strengths are unique, and that together you can achieve what no other partnership could. Walking away would be a loss for both sides." The delegates exchanged thoughtful glances, visibly moved. Respect softened their expressions, and one even gave a small bow of acknowledgement. This time, the executives noticed the difference. Their smug laughter had grown thin, and now suspicion glimmered in their eyes. They shifted uncomfortably, sensing but not yet understanding that the control they thought they held was slipping through their fingers. The cleaner felt their stares on her like heat, but she didn't falter. She could feel something unlocking inside her, a strength she had buried under years of silence. Every time they tried to use her as a tool of humiliation, she turned their cruelty into dignity, their arrogance into respect. Then came the moment that cracked the room open. One of the younger executives, flustered by the delegates' focus on her, leaned forward, his voice low but vicious. "Don't forget your place," he hissed, just loud enough for her to hear. "You're still just the cleaner." The words stung, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned back to the delegates, her voice calm and unshaken. "They want to assure you," she said, "that respect is the cornerstone of this partnership. No one here is above or beneath another." The woman in the pearl gray jacket raised her brows, studying her more closely now, then spoke firmly in her own language. When the cleaner translated, her words carried a subtle edge. "She says true leadership is measured not by wealth or power, but by how you honor those who serve beside you." The silence that followed was deafening. The executives shifted in their seats, their smug smiles faltering. For the first time, laughter had no place in the room. The cleaner felt the weight of the moment pressing down, but she also felt taller somehow, stronger. They had tried to reduce her to a joke, but every word she spoke built a wall they couldn't climb over. The foreign partners were no longer looking at the suits, no longer measuring the deal by money or numbers. They were measuring it by her. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even the men who pretended not to. The meeting stretched into its final hour, and the atmosphere in the room was nothing like what the executives had imagined. They had expected to dominate, to intimidate, to mock the cleaner until she stumbled and provided them with amusement. Instead, their laughter had dried up long ago, replaced by a creeping awareness that control had slipped from their grasp. The air was heavier now, charged with something they could not name but could not ignore. The cleaner sat with her hands folded neatly on the table, her back straight, her voice steady each time she spoke. The foreign delegates listened only to her. They no longer glanced at the men in suits except out of politeness. Every nod, every thoughtful smile, every note taken was directed toward the woman who had been dragged into the room as a pawn. One executive tried to reclaim the spotlight. He leaned forward, his words clipped and aggressive. "Tell them they must sign today. No delays. We won't wait." His tone was that of a man used to obedience, his eyes daring her to betray him. She turned toward the delegates, her voice calm and resonant. "They say they are committed to this partnership and will support whatever timeline ensures success for both sides." The difference was subtle, but the effect was profound. Instead of cornering the delegates with a demand, she opened the door to cooperation. They nodded approvingly, visibly relieved by her tact. Another executive slammed his hand lightly on the table, frustration seeping through. "Enough of this dancing around," he growled. "Tell them what we really mean, that this is their only chance, and we don't negotiate with weakness." The cleaner hesitated. She could feel all eyes on her, the mocking glares of the executives, the steady expectation of the delegates. Her chest tightened, but her voice did not waver. "They believe strength lies in unity," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "and that no lasting agreement is born from threats. They invite you to stand beside them as equals, not beneath them." A ripple moved through the room. The executives stiffened, their faces flushing with anger, but the delegates broke into quiet smiles. One of them leaned forward, clasping his hands, and said something warm and deliberate in his native tongue. The cleaner translated without hesitation. "They say it is rare to find such honesty and respect in these negotiations. They are honored to move forward with you." The deal, fragile until that moment, was sealed not by the executive's arrogance but by her grace. The delegates rose from their chairs, shaking her hand first before turning reluctantly to the executives. Their words of gratitude were directed to her. "You have guided this discussion with wisdom," the woman in the pearl gray jacket said in her own tongue, her eyes lingering on the cleaner with unmistakable respect. The cleaner bowed her head slightly, murmuring her thanks. When she translated the compliment aloud, she softened it, sparing the executives from hearing just how fully they had been eclipsed. The silence that followed was not empty, it was suffocating. The executives, red-faced and tight-lipped, could not bring themselves to laugh anymore. Their plan had turned inside out. They had invited the cleaner into the room to be a spectacle, a source of mockery. Instead, she had become the voice that carried the meeting, the bridge that made the deal possible, the reason their company would leave with victory instead of disgrace. She stood quietly, smoothing her uniform, ready to slip back into the shadows. Her broom still leaned against the wall, waiting for her hands, a reminder of the world they thought she belonged to. But as the delegates filed out, thanking her once more, she felt no shame in walking back to it. Her head was higher now, her steps measured and strong. The executives remained seated, their mouths tight, their eyes dark. They wanted to speak, to scold, to reassert themselves, but they couldn't. The memory of her voice hung in the room, louder than any protest they might muster. For once, the men who prided themselves on power and wealth had nothing to say. The cleaner picked up her broom and paused at the doorway. She glanced back, not with fear or anger, but with the quiet calm of someone who had already won. The laughter they had used to belittle her had been silenced, replaced by the weight of a truth none of them could deny. Without another word, she stepped into the hallway, leaving the boardroom cloaked in silence, the kind of silence that would echo in their memories far longer than laughter ever could.